So I've played and fully completed the new and apparently final Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 DLC, Mysteria Ecclesia, or The Mysteries of the Church is what that stands for, which you should probably know is the DLC Warhorse have been describing as, well, kind of the one you've been waiting for. The all-killer, no-filler, story-heavy DLC that's maybe, hopefully, a little more ambitious than the previous two, which, well, I think it's fair to say is what most KCD2 fans have been wanting. I mean, I liked the first two DLCs for what they were, more of a game I really love, but neither were exactly groundbreaking, and I think many of us have really been hoping that this last one, Mysteria Ecclesia, would end KCD2 on a high note. So without spoilers, does it? Let's answer that question, although before I do need to take about 10 seconds, really about 10 seconds I think, to thank today's sponsor, who are PlayOn, the publisher of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and about a million other games. If you end up being interested in Mysteria Ecclesia or just KCD2 in general by the end of this review, you can check it out using the link in the description, which helps out the channel a ton. PlayOn have absolutely no say in what I say in my review, they don't even watch it until it's already live on the channel, but thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Okay, so the first thing I should point out is that this DLC really does have no filler. The minute it begins, Henry is hired as an assistant to accompany a physician on his trip to a monastery outside Kuttenberg. And as I'm sure you've seen in the trailers, from there he's immediately thrown into the middle of a very tense situation. An illness is ravaging this monastery, people are dropping dead left and right for what seem to be different reasons, and it's up to Henry and the physician to solve the mystery of what exactly is going on. If that sounds really interesting, that's because it is. It's by far the most interesting story of the three DLCs, it really isn't even close, and Mysteria Ecclesia is also the first of the three that really does work as its own thing, as a standalone post-game story. Brushes with Death was decent enough, but ultimately just felt like a pretty good side quest, one that blended in with dozens of others from the base game. Legacy of the Forge was probably the better of the first two DLCs, but it was so heavy on very repetitive side activities that, well, it clearly was meant to be a DLC you'd play as part of a full playthrough, not grind out all at once. I mean, Legacy of the Forge had like 3 hours, maybe, of main story, and the rest of the quests in that DLC were just those quick side activities. Mysteria Ecclesia, though, couldn't be more different, because it's about 9 straight hours of quality main story content in a brand new area. Really what feels like a new map, because once you arrive at the monastery, you can't leave, as there's an illness that needs to be contained. It might sound like one, but that ends up not being a problem at all, because this new area is surprisingly big. Tons of buildings to explore, an underground, courtyards, a construction site, a training ground where some German knights are visiting and you can engage in some friendly practice combat, and just overall throughout the entire explorable map, there are endless NPCs to have conversations with and just tons to do, tons to look at. Point is though, it's a totally self-contained area. Again, there's no exiting mid-DLC, and in terms of gameplay, this really ends up working in this DLC's favor, because in a lot of ways, Mysteria Ecclesia puts you and Henry almost back at square one. For one thing, the people at the monastery of course take Henry's weapons and armor away, as he isn't supposed to be fighting anyone inside, which means if you want a weapon, you'll need to get creative. But for another, this DLC makes you do a lot of things that you just couldn't have prepared for before starting the expansion. There are new potions to brew, new equipment to craft, and more importantly, just a lot of situations that you'll need to use your brain for regardless of what your stats look like. You can't just skill check your way out of everything. Things are a bit of a struggle again in Mysteria Ecclesia, like the beginning of KCD2, and I found this DLC really satisfying because of that. It felt like Warhorse managed to give me that sense of progression with Henry again, even though I already had maxed out or near maxed out stats. I loved this DLC. For me, it was by far the most memorable of the three, and ultimately, before I get into a few problems I had with it, the kind you really should know about because they're just real issues you might run into too, but before we go there, I really just want to stress, this was the DLC I wanted. It just checked a lot of boxes for me, and the reason I'm not actually going to talk about it that long before we get into the problems is because it's so story heavy and I don't want to spoil anything. Just know though that on top of everything else, all the other good things you've already heard, there are big choices and consequences in Mysteria Ecclesia, multiple endings, characters you'll remember, and I think this is something that'll excite more than a few of you. Henry actually makes reference to this DLC story taking place after the main games. I'm not going to show examples because I don't want to spoil them, but I really liked each time that happened, although keep in mind, you can start this DLC immediately after reaching the Kuttenberg region, so I'm sure those moments are different if you start it earlier. That said, I just like seeing a few small glimpses at a post-KCD2 Henry, and it made Mysteria Ecclesia feel like a KCD2 epilogue, one that's best played after completing the main game, although again, you don't need to. Okay, so hopefully I've given you a good idea of whether this DLC is for you or not, but what are the problems with it? Well, the huge one is that for the first time, I think ever, playing KCD2, I did have a game-breaking bug. I mean, one that was about as bad as they get, and this could easily happen to you too, so probably worth knowing about. The long and short of it is that because the monastery is in quarantine during part of the main story, there are areas Henry isn't supposed to be in. So if a monastery guard spots you, you'll get yelled at a little bit, and they'll follow you back to a non-restricted area. To avoid that though, avoid being kicked out of an area where I needed to investigate, I knocked out a guard so he wouldn't see me. Which, for whatever reason, led to me being wanted even though there was no one that could have possibly spotted me. That part was just a little annoying, not the biggest problem in the world, but what became a serious issue is that my wanted status within the monastery was impossible to rid myself of from that point forward. It wouldn't go away regardless of what I did, being approached by a guard just meant an immediate game over, and, well, I just kept hoping my wanted status would fade as the story progressed, or some solution would present itself because I was able to keep going with the story by just avoiding the guards. My wanted status stuck around though through everything, even through hours of story progress, some parts of which I might add included guards, but NPCs related to the story didn't seem to register my wanted status. It was only the generic guards around the monastery that did. As you can imagine though, this eventually led to the DLC breaking entirely, because I reached a point in the story where the game needed me to report to the guard's camp to pick up an item, and you can imagine how that went. Ultimately, I had no choice but to just reload a save from about 2 hours earlier before I'd knocked out that first guard and became wanted in the first place. Looking back, I wish I'd reloaded much earlier, would have saved me a lot of trouble and time, but either way, it was a pretty unfortunate situation, and, well, if you're gonna play this DLC, which I obviously do very much recommend, I'd just avoid becoming wanted, and if you do, just reload immediately, save yourself some trouble. Anyway, really the only other criticism I have for Mysteria Ecclesia, and this one is just a small thing, but I will say I didn't understand the logic behind what this DLC takes away from you in terms of your inventory. I mentioned earlier that Henry is stripped of his weapons and armor upon entering, but what I didn't mention is that the game also takes other things away from you, like all of your materials, including your herbs and flowers for potions. But at the same time, you keep things like the poisons in your inventory and your lockpicks and things that would make a lot more sense for the monastery to not allow inside. I just don't get what the game or story logic is for why Henry needed to have all of his crafting materials taken away, but was allowed to keep lockpicks and poisons and alcohol. It just felt like an excuse for a couple of quest objectives that required you to go pick a bunch of flowers, and while that did give me some early game vibes, I appreciated having to scrounge for something like a weapon more because it made sense for the story. The same way that having lockpicks taken away would have made sense, but keeping lockpicks and poisons and not being able to keep flowers in your inventory, it felt awkward, and I could see Warhorse changing what you're able to keep and what you aren't. Honestly, I wonder if lockpicks not being taken is just an oversight, because there's a minor character who mentions to Henry that if you help him out with something, he'll be able to get you things that are strictly not allowed inside the monastery. Like lockpicks, which of course I had about 70 of in my inventory because they weren't taken away, so I had no reason to help that NPC out. That's just a small issue though, and as I said, I loved Mysteria Ecclesia, and, well, I'm just really sad KCD2 is now over, apparently. Covering this game for you guys has really been a lot of fun, from the previews last year to launch to each DLC. It's really been special, so thanks to all of you for watching my coverage. Thank you to Warhorse for including my channel in all of this. I mean, I got to visit the Czech Republic twice covering this game. I have Henry's sword in my house from one of those events. If you want one yourself, a company called Wolfland makes them. They're not sponsoring this video, but the swords are pretty cool. Anyway, point is, it's been a great year, and if this really is the end for KCD2, well, I don't think we could have asked for a better game. Thank you all for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video. It really does help my content get out there, and you'll be hearing from me again very soon for once. My review of Netflix Witcher Season 4 should be out in a couple of days, and keep an eye out for that one though. Thank you to my patrons, as always, for their support. Keep an eye out over there very soon for an update as soon as I get these Netflix Witcher reviews out of the way, because there's a movie that released too, but for now, that's all. See ya.